Welcome to CineCynics.
I'm Craig.
I'm Mark.
And for today's episode, I buzzed my head in honor of Jason Statham. Or at least that's what I tell myself.
It's been reported that director Brad Bird is currently working on his next feature film with Disney, codenamed 1952. Little else is known about this project except that it's to take place in the year 1952 and may possibly star George Clooney.
This sounds really exciting because he has a great sense of style, especially in The Incredibles when he was portraying the golden age of superheroes in that movie. And I thought it just had a great vibe and feeling. So I think he's going to do a great job with the era of the 1950s, and it's going to be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Incredibles, he really did capture that retro feeling, like the period. And I think he really has the talent to tackle this period piece.
For there not being much news about a Zombieland sequel, there has been a rumor about a Zombieland TV-type series that would be exclusively streamed on Amazon.
I think this is particularly interesting news. It's unfortunate that they don't seem to be getting any momentum in developing an actual cinematic sequel to Zombieland. I'll be excited to see a sequel in any form, and I think apart from that, it's interesting to see this new movement of films and particularly series that we see debuting on the internet or other streaming services apart from the normal method of distribution. You have the return of like Arrested Development that's only debuting on Netflix and other series on Hulu. This is good news for those looking to get their projects off the ground without having to go through the normal channels. So, for the biggest news in movies this week, director J.J. Abrams has officially signed on to direct Star Wars Episode 7, the sequel to Return of the Jedi.
I'm on the fence about this because I really enjoy J.J. Abrams. I think he has a great cinematic style, and he has a great DP that works with him, and they just come up with a lot of great visually stunning stuff, and he's just a great storyteller. Mm-hmm. But I don't want lens flares, and I don't want shaky cam lightsaber fights.
I can understand that. I, however, am a little bit more cautiously optimistic. I feel that the studios will probably tell him to tone that down a little bit, as it seemed like his normal style of doing that won't translate well for a Star Wars movie. And this is a movie that the studio probably will exert a lot of control over. For better or for worse, that remains to be seen. Also, I don't think this news is exactly unexpected, despite his initial denial of those first rumors. J.J. Abrams' vision of the Star Trek series was what initially got me to be a fan of that. So I pretty much trust him implicitly for now. I have faith in him. And also, speaking of Star Trek, I think that it's interesting that he'll be the first director in history to now have had his hands in both major science fiction series.
Yeah, because they're just both huge rivals,
yeah.
And both fans hate each other.
Deviating a little bit from the usual format of recommending a narrative film here on Watch It, I thought I'd take this opportunity to recommend instead a documentary, which I had only recently learned of and absolutely ended up loving after I viewed it. The Captains, written, directed, produced, and starring the legendary William Shatner. Portraying the occupation of a Starfleet captain in Star Trek is a rare privilege enjoyed only by a select group of actors. And in The Captains, William Shatner, James Tiberius Kirk himself, sets off on a journey to learn who these actors really are apart from their on-screen personas. From England to New York, Hollywood, and seemingly everywhere in between, Shatner sits down with each individual captain to find out about their careers and lives before Star Trek, after Star Trek, and the paths they all took, which eventually culminated in their commanding a starship in each of the series' incarnations. The conversations which take place in The Captains are truly fascinating to listen in on. They encompass a wide array of topics and even cross over many times into very personal and intimate details about each of the actors' lives. You get a truer understanding of who they are, the immense talents which they possess and have brought to bear in their roles as captains, and the struggles and sacrifices which they've endured during their time on Star Trek, sacrifices to which, as a fellow captain of Starfleet, Shatner himself relates. While addressing the subject of Star Trek reverently, this documentary treats the legacy of the series as a whole rather than getting bogged down in the finer elements of all the individual iterations. And this is where it really shines and remains enjoyable apart from Trek, because it's really about the actors and their experiences. And above all else, it's about the personal journey of Shatner himself, as the film examines his early career before Star Trek, the disdain and uncomfortability he felt over the role of Captain Kirk, and his final coming to terms with and embracing of that iconic character. You get to see William Shatner for the living legend he truly is. And if nothing else, The Captains is an hour and a half of a very candid and disarmingly affable Shatner being Shatner. And who doesn't enjoy seeing that?
Considering Parker is a heist/revenge story, I thought it would be a great time to recommend one of my favorite heist movies of the 90s, Point Break. Directed by Kathryn Bigelow, stars Keanu Reeves, Patrick Swayze, and Gary Busey, who delivers some really funny lines, but now that I think about it, probably wasn't intentional. Keanu Reeves plays Johnny Utah, an FBI agent who goes undercover as a surfer to catch a gang of bank robbers dubbed the Ex-Presidents. But when he infiltrates this gang, he becomes enamored by the thrill-seeking lifestyle and its leader, Bodhi, played by Patrick Swayze. The characters are believable and surprisingly fleshed out. Utah is this Boy Scout who used to be a college quarterback. Angelo Pappas, played by Gary Busey, is this veteran FBI agent who's really pissed off about being partnered with someone so green. And Bodhi plays this surfer type who lives fast and free and tries to find new ways of living on the edge. I remember watching reruns of this movie all the time, and it stuck with me all these years because it's so entertaining and rewatchable. Point Break has great story, characters, and really great action sequences, so I definitely recommend you watch it.
Parker, directed by Taylor Hackford and based on the character by Richard Stark, stars Jason Statham as a ruthless and cunning career criminal out for revenge after being betrayed by the crew on his last job.
So first thing I really enjoyed about this movie was the coherent and believable and very realistic plot that the movie had.
Apart from the fact that Taylor Hackford is a very competent storyteller, I feel that in large part that has to do with the source material from which this movie was adapted, because Richard Stark was a master of the crime thriller genre, and it shows here in the story of Parker. You have very straightforward and ruthless villains who are willing to kill and betray to get what it is that they want, but yet they go up against the even more ruthless anti-hero Parker, who will stop at nothing to get back what's rightfully his.
And one of the reasons why this movie works so well is that it doesn't try to be too big. It has a very centralized story, and it doesn't try to throw theatrics at you like the Ocean's 11 movie, which was a very huge, broad, elaborate plan. This was very simple and straightforward, and I think that's why it worked so well.
You have the big opening high sequence at the beginning of the movie, the subsequent betrayal, and then it goes on to Parker's hunt as he exacts revenge on all of those involved. This was also a very well-acted movie. You had Michael Chiklis in the role of the main villain, and in that he was very convincing. He had a very menacing quality, but he was also loathsome at the same time. That made it all the more satisfying when Parker got his revenge in the end.
And Jennifer Lopez, she hasn't been in a lot of stuff lately, and I've only recently seen her on TV shows like American Idol, so it's kind of a good performance. I wasn't really too big of a fan of Jennifer Lopez's in the first place, but she did a pretty competent job.
I'm not a big fan either. I thought she actually did pretty well in this movie. More convincing in this than a lot of the acting that I've seen her do.
Like Made in Manhattan.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think also because they gave her a part that was actually, it had some depth to it, and it made her interesting instead of these cookie cutter romantic comedy what have yous. But for the most part, I think she did very well in this. And of course, the reason that you go to see this movie, you have Jason Statham, and he was incredible in this, I thought, and he really exercised his range as an actor.
Yeah, I was actually surprised. Usually we only see him kicking a lot of ass. I mean, he does kick ass in this movie, but we really don't see his emotionality and his delivery. It's actually was surprisingly really good, and I haven't seen him do anything like this since The Bank Heist, which wasn't really an action movie. It was a heist movie.
Yeah, he's usually very underrated and underestimated as an actor, and I think this is wrong. And if you really view all the works that he's done, he has a lot of presence, and there's a lot he can convey just with his facial expressions. It's what he doesn't say that can kind of conveys what he's thinking. I mean, there was a reason that Guy Ritchie cast him all those years ago in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, because he saw his presence. He knew that he encompasses this larger than life, I'm gonna kick your ass sort of guy. The one observation I do have about Jason Statham's interpretation as Parker in this movie, as opposed to other iterations of the Parker character we've seen, like Mel Gibson in Payback, is that he seems to be a slightly more compassionate version. And that's not entirely authentic to Richard Stark. Parker is supposed to be this kind of anti-hero with absolutely no redeeming qualities, except the efficiency with which he's able to complete a job. But in this, we see him having a little bit more pity on bystanders, or people who are innocent of the situation, and that's not exactly what Parker is about. He takes no pity, and whichever way he meets his ends, the most efficient ways is what he'll take, whether that means being reasonable or brutal. But in the end, I think this works because it's really more of a Jason Statham movie than a strict adaptation of Parker. And in a Jason Statham movie, we want to see him as the hero that we can root for and see ourselves in.
And yes, we go to see this movie for Jason Statham. And what does Jason Statham movies always have? Really great action. And there was definitely not as much as I thought there would be, but I think there was plenty for the viewer to enjoy.
The thing is, in this sort of movie with such an involved heist plot, you have to follow along all the different threads in the story, and you can't always focus so much on one particular character at the expense of everything else that's going on. And I think that's what you see here, in respect with not being able to see as much Statham as we would like. And apart from that, it's also with this movie, there's less martial arts, I think, than other Statham movies.
It was definitely more hand-to-hand combat. Like him doing throws and punches and elbows and just going to the extreme to stop his attacker.
Yeah.
Which is shown in a scene.
And I think also about the lack of martial arts, it has to do with the fact that there's not much of that in the Parker stories, so there really wouldn't be much place for Statham to be, going kung fu on everybody. Another aspect of this film which I liked is that it's very visually enjoyable to watch. As I mentioned earlier, Taylor Hackford is very talented behind the camera, and with all of the very bright and exotic backdrops, there was a lot with which for him to work his magic. There was a lot of vibrancy. But it was also very interesting to see that vibrancy juxtaposed with the very brutal world of Richard Stark's Parker.
And like you said, it was very, very visually enjoyable. And one of the things I really enjoyed about this was seeing all this old money and seeing all these big palaces, these houses on the water in Palm Beach. I mean, it made me feel really poor.
That was a very interesting take on this lifestyle that those of us who aren't millionaires often get to see. These, old money Palm Beach mansions that have been in their families for hundreds of years.
And it was also nice to see that opposed to Jennifer Lopez and how she wants to live in this world, but she's in the same boat as, middle America is, and just seeing her emotion being thrown onto screen, having to deal with, money issues and her car getting repossessed. And I think that showed a lot of character in the movie itself, too.
Yeah, and also her, like Parker, are outsiders to this. The one small flaw I think this movie has, that perhaps it's just slightly too long, that maybe it could have been 5 to 10 minutes shorter, because with Stark's novels, with Richard Stark's Parker novels, they are very fast-paced, quick reads, and they go along at almost a blistering pace, and maybe that wasn't as well reflected here in the movie.
Yeah. And especially if you say that, and it was paced very oddly then, because it was very suspenseful in between each major set piece. Yeah. So it kind of went on to a little bit too long of him. I know he was trying to get his plan together and have everything calculated and everything like that, but it felt a little bit too long, and it could have been cut down just a tiny bit.
Yeah, I mean the issues with the pacing were very minor, and of course it is also a bit. It's a crime thriller, and it's kind of a fantasy piece as well, because you kind of want to get lost in the extravagance of it all. So maybe some viewers might appreciate the length a little bit more in getting lost in it, but I think they could have trimmed it just a tad.
All right. Considering that was the only gripe that we had with the movie, what would you recommend?
I would say go to the theater to see it.
I'd say definitely see it. Considering all the crap that's out right now, that's definitely a movie you should go to see in the movies. And if you like CineCynics, rate, comment, and subscribe.
Check back every Saturday for more movie news, recommendations, and reviews.
And also follow us on Twitter, our blog spot, and soon Facebook.
And the question this week is, what are your favorite Jason Statham movies?